Welcome to Excel 2010 statistics video number 15. We're going to talk all about frequency distribution and the charts for frequency distributions for categorical and quantitative data. Here are all of our topics. This is going to be an epic video. So when you're watching this video, if you look below the video, it says see more. If you click on that link, you'll see this actual listing of all the topics in this video. And next to each topic is a minute mark. And if you click on that, you will jump to that part of the video, because this is going to cover a lot of topics. In essence, this is frequency distribution and charts, almost all the topics all in one video. Now let's go over to our Excel workbook. If you want to download this workbook, Business 210, Excel 2010, Chapter 2, click on the link below the video. All right, so we're starting Chapter 2. And in Chapter 1, we defined descriptive statistics, tabular, graphical, and numerical summaries of data. Now, why do we have to summarize data anyway? If we go over to the sheet data, this is raw data. And this is actually the data set we're going to be using for this whole chapter. Sample of 200 sales from www.boomerangs.com. And we're going to use descriptive statistics to reveal patterns in the raw data. Oh, yeah, that's why we have descriptive statistics where we summarize data, because it's really hard to make sense of this. How many of the Carlota boomerangs or the Yanaki boomerangs did people buy? What age group bought the most boomerangs? In what region do we buy the most boomerangs? So there's lots of good information we can create from this raw data. So that's what we're doing. I'm going to go back over to the topic sheet. So in Chapter 2, that's this chapter, we'll do tabular and graphical. Tabular just means, hey, create a frequency distribution and count how many times something occurred in a category. And graphical means make a chart. Chapter 3, we'll do numerical. That means calculating the average, which means mean, median, or mode, or standard deviation. All right, so here's our little schematic for Chapter 2. There's a lot of topics here. We're doing a lot of different types of frequency distributions and a lot of different types of charts and graphs. Categorical data, that means label. We saw last chapter that could be nominal or ordinal. Tabular methods means frequency distribution. We'll also see how to do a relative or percent frequency distribution and cross tabulation for categorical data. Graphical methods, we'll use column and pie. Very important when we do a column for categorical data, the column will have no gaps between the columns, and we'll see that. Don't forget the textbook we're using always calls column chart bar. But you know, columns are vertical. They stand up. They hold up Greek architecture. And that's the word Excel uses, so we're going to call them column. All right, quantitative. Hey, quantitative is just a fancy way of saying number. Tabular, graphical. Tabular, we're going to do this similar to categorical data, frequency distribution, relative and percent frequency distributions. We'll also do a cumulative frequency distribution, and then a cumulative relative or percent frequency distribution, and cross tabulation. I know that's a mouthful there, but we'll get to it. And once we do it a time or two, you'll see it's pretty straightforward. And then from this data, we'll create histograms and ogive charts. Also, we will create, so the histogram and ogive are made from these. Dot plot is a graphical method we'll do separately. Stem and leaf is a graphical method we'll do separately. Both the dot plot and the stem and leaf display are similar to a histogram. And then we'll see how to do a scatter diagram. Now, all of this, the point of all of this is what? Oh, yeah, raw data, hard to make sense of. Hard to see patterns or trends. These methods here summarize so we can see patterns and trends and help us make decisions. All right, let's go over to the sheet data. This is the data set we're going to use throughout these videos for Chapter 2. Now, we're going to do a bunch of different charts. Here's the whole data set. As we go through, I'm only going to take certain columns just so everything fits on the screen. So for example, if I go over to frequency distribution in charts F for formulas, you can see I've taken just a few of the columns. Now the reason I've done this is so that it fits on the screen while I'm shooting the video. In general, these are the data sets you have to deal with, and you would just select this column if you wanted to analyze it or summarize it or make a chart. All right, we're going over to FD in charts formulas. Now here I want to do 3 frequency distributions and then 3 charts. And these, what we see in these 3 examples here, actually I'm going to minimize this ribbon. You can either right click minimize or do Control F1. These 3 frequency distributions for categorical data, quantitative data when we have integers. Now look at this. Age is a number, right? Age, we have 21, 57, 25. These are the ages of the people that bought the boomerangs, right? So, but these are integers. So when we go to create a frequency distribution, we'll have a slightly different method of creating our categories or classes than we would if we were doing revenue, which has a decimal. So that's down here, quantitative decimal. All right? So 1, 2, 3 frequency distributions, and from those we'll create our charts. Now, let's see if I can zoom in here. All right, the first one, West, East, South, Midwest, we just want to count. In which region did we make the most sales? Now, these are transactions. If we go back to this original data set on the data sheet, you can see each one of these is a transaction, a particular sale, right? So we have a date, coupon, MasterCard, East. Oh, that's the column we're using right now. The price, the quantity, the actual transaction amount, etc. So each one of these is a single sale. So in this column here, and if we go back over to this here, oh yeah, if we just count how many Wests there are in this column, it tells us how many transactions we sold in the West. All right, so we want to count West, East, South, and Midwest. Now this is a counting situation with one criteria. We're not going to count how many transactions there are. That's 200. We want to count how many Wests, East, South, etc. All right, and actually we've already done this a few times in this class. We're going to use the count if function, equals count if. Now it needs a range and a criteria. Now as we copy this formula down, the range argument has to be locked. But the criteria, notice as the formula is copied down each successive row, it has a new criteria. So let's keep that in mind as we create our formula here. OK, range, I'm going to click in the first cell and use our keyboard shortcut Control-Shift down arrow to highlight all the way down to the bottom. And now we need it locked, so we hit the F4 key. Now notice, I know some of you in this class are brand new to Excel. The F4 key locks it. That means $signs in front of the letter and number, the column and row reference. That just means it's locked. As we copy it down, the blue box will not move. And we saw that in the last 2 chapters, Chapter 0 and Chapter 1. All right, so now I'm going to look at my screen tip, type a comma, and you can see the criteria argument is bold. That means, hey, give me the criteria. And it is, boom. So I click right there with my mouse, F6. It's not really F6. It's one cell to my left. That way, as I copy it down, the little box will move. Now I'm going to close parentheses. Actually, with a function like this, you can just enter it, and Excel will automatically put the close parentheses in. Now I'm going to Control and hit Enter. That just puts the formula in the cell and keeps the cell highlighted. And that's good here because I immediately want to do something, which is to copy it down. Now I can sort of see up here in the formula bar. I can see up in the formula bar the formula. I'm going to point to the little fill handle in the bottom corner, and when my selection cursor turns to an angry rabbit, I click and drag down. I'm going to click in the last cell and hit F2. Oh, look at that. The blue box, as I copied it down, this blue box right here, remained locked, and that green cell moved. Absolutely perfect. Now let's add these up. The keyboard shortcut for auto sum is Alt equals. So I'm using the sum function. And of course, there are 200 transactions from our sample. So of course, when we count, these are Mutually exclusive categories, which means anytime we find an item in here, it only fits into one category, and they are collectively exhaustive, which means there's nothing in this column that won't fit into one of these categories, which means we have all of the categories or enough categories to account for everything. So of course, when we add it up, we get 200. Now, does this frequency distribution give us good information? Yeah, sure. Much easier to see here in this frequency distribution that West had the most sales. So out of our sample of 200, 93 of them were in the West. Midwest had the second most. East and South were just about tied for last. Maybe we did a great job of selling in the West, or maybe there's just more boomerang enthusiasts in the West. So we have some useful information summarized in a tabular form. Now, this is great, but how about a chart? Charts are great because they give you an immediate visual impact. So let's go ahead and make a column chart. Column charts with gaps between the columns are great for categorical data. Let's go ahead and highlight. And you want to make sure and have your column headers or field names or variable names at the top for both the categories and the numbers. And remember from last chapter, these are called the elements, right? So we've collected some summarized information about an element, which means we've listed each item exactly one time, and then we have some summary statistic. All right, so we've highlighted this. Notice the ribbon is minimized, but once I click on Insert, I can see, go to the Charts group. I click on this. Now let's fix this up a little bit. Let's click on the legend and delete. Let's click on the lines inside, delete. Let's click on the columns, and notice they're all selected. Now, one important thing about categorical data, you got to have gaps between. This is just a category. It's not like later when we have our numerical data that we have to get rid of this gap to indicate that there's a continuous stretch of numbers. Here, we absolutely want that gap. It visually says there is a separation between these categories. All right, so I've highlighted these. There's little white dots on each one. I'm either going to right-click Format or use the keyboard shortcut Control-1. Now, I'm just going to be silly here. I'm going to go to Fill and say Vary Colors by Point. Absolutely do not have to do this. I'm a big color guy, so I like to show the different colors. All right, now let's go up to our chart tools. And if you want to turn this back on while we're the ribbon's on, you can either right-click, unclick the minimize, or Control F1 as a toggle. Control F1. All right, there's our context-sensitive chart tool ribbon tabs. We want to go to Layout. Actually, I'm going to move this up a little bit. And I want to show a label at the top. So I'm going to go to Data Labels, Outside In. Oh, look at that. That's really cool. We have the frequency at the top. So you know what? I don't need this axis. I'm going to click on it and hit Delete. So frequency. All right, so we have our categories, our frequency. Let's give this a better title. I'm going to click on this. In last couple chapters videos, we saw how to either create a formula or type a text title. As long as you have your solid line here, I'm going to click up here, and I'm going to type hopefully I spelled it right. Now notice I've typed it there, and I'm going to hit Enter. Number of transactions by region. So we could put a label here that says frequency, but this says number of transaction, and then there's our little number. Now, a couple other important things about this column chart. The order of these labels here does not matter. It conveys no information. Now, if we sorted this, there's a type of chart we'll see later called a Pietro chart, if I pronounce it that correctly. Now, you can sort it, but the information comes from the height of the column, not the labels, right? So even if they're sorted, right, the information about which one did best when you're looking at this. Comes from the height, not from the order of the labels. All right, so number of transactions by region. Now I'm going to point to the edge here and click and drag in and make it a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to zoom in again. You can either use your zoom down here or hold Control and roll. I'm going to bring this over here like this. See if I can make this a little bit bigger here. I'm going to right-click this. And here's my mini toolbar. I'm going to click there and type it 12. All right, so columns do not touch for categorical data. Height of the columns convey the count. Order of categories conveys no info. We could see things like west had the most and south and east had the least. So categorical frequency distribution and the appropriate chart, a column chart. Now let's go on to quantitative. Oh, age. Now here's the deal. We have categories here. We just listed the categories. But here, what's the category? Well, we could go and count how many people were exactly 21 or exactly 57. But that would be a lot of, that'd be, 0 to 70 or something like that. So that'd be 71 rows. I don't want that. I want to summarize it a little in a more tight fashion. Now, in this example, we're going to have an age category. We'll say something like 0 up to 19, 20 up to 49. In a later example, we'll see how to make the categories a little bit more stretched out. So what that means is when you get to numbers like age or revenue, we don't have a category, so we have to make one. Now, the textbook says there's an art to this, and there is an art to it. You actually have to just do trial and error and kind of stretch the data and contract the data until you get the a shape that makes sense. Now, here I'm just going to kind of give you the increment. On our next tab, we'll actually see how to calculate what the increment should be and how many classes you should use. But even if you have a method, it's still an art. So it takes practice to figure out how many categories we should have, what the increment on each category should be. All right, so I'm just picking 19. Well, obviously, if we're doing age, right, we're going to start at 0. And so we want 0 up to 19. Now, here's the deal. This is integers as opposed to decimals. So our category is going to be 0 to 19, 20 to 49. All right, so let's go ahead and see how to do this. Here's the starting point. So I'm going to say equal, whatever the lower is, one cell to my left, plus, and actually let me blow this up a little bit. All right, equals this plus the increment. Now, as I copy this down, I need that lock. So I'm going to hit the F4 key. All right, I'm going to hit Enter. So we got 0 to 19. That's going to be our first category here. And we'll count how many ages are between 0 and 19. But we need our next category. Now, what's beautiful about this little table here is we're going to be able to have it created by formulas. And once we change the increment, everything will change here. So if this is 0 to 19, what does this have to be? 20 to 49. So I say equals this. That means the lower from the category, the upper from the category from before, plus 1. Notice this is a relative cell reference. So right now it's looking to the one before. When I copy it down here, it will be looking right there. Control Enter. Now remember, this is one cell to the left plus the increment. So if I drag it down one, oh, I can't add it. It's 20 to 39, not 49. Whew, luckily I have Excel to tell me add 19. All right, now I can copy these two different formula down, and I have my categories. What's beautiful about this is I could change this to 15. Now, what would be incorrect about this? Well, I calculated the min just by using the min function and the max. The problem with these categories is that the categories would not be collectively exhaustive, which means we would have some numbers that needed an additional category which we didn't create. So 63, we can clearly see there's some people that are 65 that bought some boomerangs. So this won't work. That's the trial and error part of it. All right, and we'll get more into all of that in a little while. But here, suffice it to say, these categories include all the numbers from 18 to 65. All right, now, when we're calculating creating a formula, we're actually going to use the lower and upper. And we saw this in Chapter 00 in our Introduction to Excel. We can use the COUNTIFs function with two criteria. However, we are going to use this frequency distribution and the chart, and we need a good label here. So the people looking at this frequency distribution in the chart get good information. So I want a little label here that says 0 to 19. So we're going to create a text formula. I'm going to say equals, and I'm going to click on that. Now, right now, that just says, hey, go over there and get that number. But now we need to join. And we saw this in our Chapter 00. We're going to use the ampersand, Shift 7. This formula says take whatever is in that cell, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells to my left, and then I'm going to, in double quotes, space, dash, space, end double quote. Now, right now, all this is done is joined some text in quotes. There's the join symbol and whatever's in K16. If I enter this, you could see I have a 0 and a dash. But what do I want? I want to join one more thing. So Shift 7 and the upper. This is called a text formula. Control Enter, and now I can copy this down. Now that's pretty cool. And notice if we change the increment here, we have all of our all of our upper and lowers that we're going to use in our frequency, our COUNTIFs formula change, and the labels change. Really, this is the magic of Excel. You know, we're doing lots of data analysis, and we want to build everything in a robust, efficient way. So we change one input, and it all changes. All right, I'm going to change this back to 19. Now we can do our COUNTIFs. Here's what we got to do. We got to tell the COUNTIFs formula to look through this column, and we have two criteria. So for the first category, it's, hey, look at each number and ask two questions. Are you greater than or equal to 0? And are you less than or equal to 19? So for here, we'll ask the question, are you greater than or equal to 0? True. Are we less than or equal to 19? False. So that one's not included in this first category. But when we get down here, we get, is this number right here greater than or equal to 0? Ding, ding, ding. True. Is it less than or equal to 19? Ding, ding, ding. True. So it will be counted. All right, let's make our formula. COUNTIFs. Now, COUNTIFs is awesome. It's got an S, right? The COUNTIF we saw up here doesn't have an S. So that means we can have as many criteria as we want. I think up to 255. Oh, that would be silly. But we only have 2. Now, here it is. The screen tip will be polite. It says, give me the criteria range 1 and then the criteria 1. So let's go ahead and highlight our age column. Control Shift down arrow F4. Notice the screen tip is bold, comma, criteria. Now we're going to have to put our comparative operator and join it with our lower end for this class. I'm going to, in double quotes, greater than or equal to, end double quote, ampersand, and the 0. Now the way I remember how to do this is notice the small side is pointing towards the 0. So that means the 0 has to be smaller. And the open end on the greater than symbol, or the alligator, right? The open end is pointing to what? Oh, the whole column. So I always think of it, oh, yeah, that's pointing over there. So that number in that column has to be greater than or equal to the 0. All right, so that's criteria 1, comma, and then criteria range 2. Same range, Control Shift down arrow F4. You have to repeat it twice, comma, and then criteria 2. Now, it gets kind of tricky here because, see, now my formula is hanging over and I can't really click there, but no problem. I'll show you a way to do this. Now, this is the upper, so we double quote less than or equal to. Remember, there's no such thing as a less than equal to sign together or a greater than or equal to. So you always have to list the two symbols. Equal sign always comes second. So I double quote that, and then join it to, and I can't quite get to that. Well, there's a couple ways. It's L16, so I could type L16, right? And you could sort of see the people there, purple there. Or you can click on the cell above and the dancing ants. Remember, when the dancing ants are going, you can change it with the arrow key, so then I'll down arrow. All right, that's our formula. Now, we are, in the course of this chapter and class, going to see a number of different ways of summarizing quantitative data in a class. This is called a class. And the key is there's a lower and upper. We'll see how to do this with pivot tables. We'll see how to do it with the frequency function. And there's even some data analysis add-ins that we'll use. The countifs is the most versatile. And the reason why is you have control over the comparative operators. If I wanted, which we will down here for decimals, you don't have to include the equal sign. All right? So the countifs is really the most versatile of all the methods of counting quantitative data between a lower and an upper value. All right, Control Enter. And now I'm going to drag this down. I'm going to the last one, and I'm going to hit F2 to put it in edit mode. And since there was a lot to this formula, you really have to check it. And it looks like the blue box is locked all the way down. And it looks like the K19 and the L19 work like a charm. All right, I'm going to hit Enter. I'm going to add this up. Alt equals and Enter. So I've added it up. Mutually exclusive categories, collectively exhaustive. We counted all of the records given this criteria. So we can clearly see from this frequency distribution, remember the point is to summarize and get some information. Wow, most of the boomerang throwers are between 20 and 39. And this website, Colorado, it's a pretty good company, makes pretty good boomerangs. You know, a lot of the competitors are in this age range right here. Also, we can notice, well, there's not very many in this age range, right? Well, these are purchases. This is not saying anything about whether they're throwers. These are the people who actually bought, right? Not many below 19. But look at this. There's a bunch, the bunch between 40 and 59, in essence 40 and 60. A lot of people there. There's even some between 60 and 79. So boomerang throwing as a sport is enjoyed by a wide range of ages. Now, in a little while, we'll see how to break this apart, and we'll actually do increments of 5 years, I think it is, to give us a better picture. So this is a kind of very tight, compact categorization of age. Again, later we'll see how to expand this and get more detail. All right, so this is quantitative, categorical. For quantitative, we're going to use a column chart. But again, we're going to have to do something slightly different. So let's see how we do this. Now, we have our label here and our categories. This will show up on the horizontal axis. And then our label for our numbers, quantitative data. Also, the chart wizard calls them series. So I'm going to go up to Insert, Column. Now, let me show you a keyboard shortcut right here, because the default chart on most Excel systems is the column chart. So there is a keyboard shortcut. It's Alt F1. And Alt F1, let me put a little note here. I put default chart because that is what it puts, default chart on the sheet you're working on. You can change that, but most computers don't. And since we're using so many column charts, I'm going to use that from now on. Alt F1. All right, now this is going to represent quantitative data, and it is also continuous data. They happen to be integers, but are categories for 0 to 19 and 20 to 39. Since these are all expressed in integers, there's nothing that could fit between 19 and 20, right? We're never going to get a number between these. So we want to portray that visually by removing the gap width. So I'm going to click on this column right here. Notice they're all selected, and Control 1, or you could right-click Format. Control 1. Ah, look at that. Under series options, there's gap width. Just like that. All right, I'm going to go to fill. Again, this is unnecessary. We'll actually see how to have columns that are the same color later on, and I'm going to vary colors by point. Oh, that is so cool. Look at that. Now we're giving visual information, right? There is no gap. 0 to 19, 20 to 39, nothing could fit in between. Now I'm going to delete this. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click up here and type number of transactions by age group. Enter. Now, you actually can click in here and highlight and do that also there. But I kind of have, in this class, kept to the formula bar, because sometimes we'll make formulas that link the title or the label to the cells, and other times we'll type. All right, I'm going to right-click and go to my mini toolbar and type 12. I'm going to click on these lines, delete. I'm going to click on the columns that are all selected. I go up to Layout, Data Labels, Outside End. I'm going to click here. Now, in this case, over here, I don't know, we kind of got away with not putting a label here because region, and these regions were quite obvious. But down here, I want to put a label and include the unit. So I'm going to go up to Layout, Axis, Horizontal, Below, and type something like age, and then in parentheses, years. All right. All right. So we can clearly see a couple things here. Now, again, this is quantitative data with a column chart. This is called a histogram. We can clearly see that this is the biggest category, and then kind of tails off here. We can sort of see the shape of the data too. Up on this categorical data, we can't really see the shape because the order of the categories doesn't give us any information. But here, this order does give us some information, right? It goes from left to right, smallest age to biggest. So we can kind of see a shape to this data. All right, so we can clearly see which ones are biggest, which ones are smallest, and we can see some shape also. That shape will become very important later. We'll talk about skew, and in later chapters we'll do a lot with frequency distribution and shape. You can kind of see it sort of. It looks like it's skewed towards a couple bigger values are probably pulling up the average if you were to calculate the average or the mean. And we'll talk about some other shape issues later. I'm going to make this chart a little bit smaller. I'm going to zoom in. All right. This is called a histogram. Columns touch to indicate that no numbers can fit between the classes. Height of the columns convey the count. Order of classes important to help reveal the shape of the data. All right, now we're going to do another quantitative down here. So I'm going to scroll down here. This time we're going to do sales. Now what's important, the difference between these two, here we have 0 to 19 and 20 to 39. But what about these decimals over here? We couldn't do, so for our sales, right, we couldn't do 0 to 50 and then 51 to 100. Because if we had 50 as the upper and 51 as the lower, there'd be some numbers that fit in between. Now, the textbook tells you to do 0 up to 49.99. But I'm going to show you an alternative method here. And this method is a little bit more robust, especially if you have data with lots of decimals. It's like, how do you pick the upper end? Right? So what we'll do is we'll say 0 up to 50, but not including 50. 50 up to 150, but not including 150. So let's see how to do this. Actually, I said that wrong. We're going to do 0 to 75. 75 up to 150. So let's create our categories, and then I'll show you very clearly how to label this so there's no ambiguity. Again, our goal is to have mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive categories. All right, so we're going to say equals this plus, and we're going to have to lock this. Here, I'm going to say equals that. So now we have two 75s. So far, that means there could be some ambiguity, but we'll fix it in just a moment. Now I can copy this down. Remember, it's one cell to my left plus the increment. Now I copy this. And notice, checking this, sure enough, it's looking at, hey, lower is looking the upper from the previous class. And this one's looking at the lower and adding the increment. Now, we're going to create our label here. And this is where you have to be careful. Now, when we do our pivot table later, it looks, let me just do a little trick here, right? The pivot table will spit out this. And this is slightly ambiguous. You're not sure whether the 75 is fitting here or down here. Now, after you use pivot tables a while, and we'll see how to do this later, you maybe just get used to it, and you know that the 75 is always included on the lower end. But I do not want to let our viewer or the person that uses this frequency distribution and the histogram to ever get confused. So I'm going to be more careful with our labels. Now, I'm going to create a formula equals the lower end, and we're going to join the shift 7 to get the ampersand, in double quotes a space, up to space and double quote. All right. So when we enter that formula there, those are relative cell references. So when we copy it down, we get 0 up to 75, 75 up to 50, 50 up to 225. Now, this is common. I've seen this in histograms and charts before, but I like to be even a little bit more explicit. So I want to create a slightly different label. Now, we can use these for our charts, and these can be here for us as we learn it, or vice versa. I sometimes will use these, sometimes I'll use these. But we're going to say 0, ampersand. And then I want to say 0 has to be less than or equal to sales. The sales has to be less than space. So this label right here, all inside of our double quotes, is going to be joined with the lower and the upper. Now let's think about this. What does this say? You may have seen a construction like this in algebra or something like that. The sales is sitting in the middle. That sales number represents all the data in this column. So notice, sales. The bigger end is pointing towards the sale. So it says sales have to be bigger than or equal to 0. The little sign's pointing toward the 0, so 0 has to be smaller. But it's that big sign that's pointing towards the sale. And the little sign is pointing towards the sale. So it says this is a label. This is not the same construction we're going to use for our formula at all. But as a label, sales in the middle, bigger than, equal to. The sales, every time it goes through this, sorry, I was pointing to the wrong column. Every time it goes through the sales column, the sales number, each individual one will have to ask the question, am I greater than or equal to 0? And am I less than 75? Now notice, all the way down, and you got to be consistent with this, the upper end is not included, right? And that is the trick. The conceptual trick to creating categories, 1 category, 2 category, 3 category, 4 categories, that are mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. It just means we're not going to double count. If we had an equal sign here and here, we may double count. If there was 150 and we had an equal sign here and here, 150 would be counted here and here. All right. Now, this is just a label. I want to compare this up here. We talked about the construction of our logic up here and how the bigger, that greater than sign is pointing towards all the numbers, and the less than is pointing towards all the numbers. So when we get to our formula, it's different than our label construction. Now, this formula is it is very similar to what we're going to do down here. The only difference is this was integers, so there was equal, equal. When we get down to our formula down here, it's going to be the lower end is equal, but the upper end does not have the equal. All right, let's create our formula equals countifs. Criteria range 1, well, it's sales, so I'm going to scroll over. At the top, Control-Shift down arrow F4, comma. Here, and I'm going to do a little trick here. I'm going to highlight this in edit mode, copy Control-C, because I know I'm going to have to use it again later. Criteria 1, in double quotes, greater than or equal to end double quotes. Right? So again, that big alligator's open mouth is pointing towards all the other numbers in the column. So those numbers have to be greater than or equal to the 0. That's criteria 1, comma, and the criteria 2. Control V, comma, our criteria 2. This one has to be in double quotes less than ampersand, the upper end. All right, so the key here for our decimals, we have the equal sign on the lower end, but not the upper end. That's so we don't double count. Close parentheses, Control Enter, copy it down. Click in the last cell, F2. Whoa, looks like it's working OK. I'm going to scroll over here and make sure that blue, yeah, look at that. Now we got to add them up. Alt equals is the keyboard shortcut, and Enter. So now we have counted our sales data. Now what this says is 0 up to 75 bucks. People spent 0 up to 75 bucks. 119 of the transactions? 75 up to 150 bucks. 61 of the transactions. 150 to 225, 15, and 5. Now, actually, this is a common pattern you observe when you are making purchases, right? When you go to this website, people are going to buy 1 or 2 boomerangs, right? But probably not that many. That's a lot. So 0 to 75, maybe that's 3 boomerangs, right? Wow, here that would be like 12 boomerangs. And that's true for purchases. So the pattern that is revealed in this frequency distribution for purchases, if you went to a department store, right, and said, lots of people are buying a shirt here, some socks there, but not many people are buying $2,000 refrigerator. So this kind of pattern is actually quite typical. Now let's visualize this. I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut Alt F1. Alt F1. You don't have to do that. You can go up to Insert Column, Delete. I'm going to click here, click up in the formula bar, and say number of so I think is it revenue? It's either sales or revenue amount. Hopefully I spelled that right. I'm going to right click, mini toolbar, 12, enter. I put it in edit mode, I can F7 and spell check it. I'm going to delete the lines. I'm going to click on the columns, Control 1, that's format the data series. Remove the gap, fill, vary colors by point. You don't have to do that. Absolutely beautiful. I'm going to delete this. Oops, what's that? Oh, I can go to Layout, Data, Labels, outside N. And then I'm going to add a axis, horizontal, below. Sales amount. And I'm going to put a unit. All right, so we see clearly from this chart, we can see the pattern, right? We can see individual things like, wow, 0 up to $75, dollars, the most by far, and also the pattern, right? As we tail off to the upper sales transactions amounts, we get fewer and fewer. Wow, isn't descriptive statistics fun? We're summarizing, creating useful information from raw data. Let's see if I can right-click and maybe change it to 10. Right-click. Oh, it's already 10. All right, so let's. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to close my ribbon up here. Right-click, minimize, or Control F1. I know the keyboard shortcuts get confusing. All right, so there we have these. The essence of Chapter 2. We did frequency distribution for categorical, frequency distribution for quantitative, and note the difference in how we create our category or class for integers or decimals. And then our charts, column charts with gaps for categorical data, column charts without gaps called histograms. Now, I want to make a note. This is categorical, right? These are numbers. We have no gap, a gap. So I want to make a note about here, because when we get to Chapter 5, you're going to be going, well, I thought only categorical data could have columns with gaps. Let's go over to, it says column note. Just note here, discrete numbers. Discrete means 0, 1, 2. We're counting, and there are gaps between. There's no number when we're counting. If we're counting flips, we're flipping a coin and counting how many heads, right? We'll do that in Chapter 5 or 6 or something. You can't get 1.5 heads, right? So you actually, sometimes with numbers, have to use a column chart with gaps to indicate that nothing can fit in between. All right, so that's just a little preview about columns. All right, so now in this example here, kind of nicely summarized everything, but I want to show you how do we calculate, so for our age, how do we calculate how many categories or classes and what the increment is. Let's go to this construct FD. Here's the same age data here. Step 1, 2, 3. This is just a guide. And in fact, when we go through this example and use our little rule, like 2 to the 7th power, and calculate everything, we're going to see that it actually doesn't work. We're actually going to have to change it. So all of these things we're going to do, step 1, 2, 3. This is like a useful recipe, but ultimately it is a judgment call. This does help to kind of give you a basic idea of where to start and then adjust things to figure out what the lower and upper and the classes should be. Now notice we're going to do this and we're going to have a lot more data or summarized data revealed to help us see the patterns of who is buying the boomerangs, what age group are buying transactions. First thing, step 1, determine the number of classes used in a guide. 2 to the k has to be greater than n. Now n, we'll see this throughout the rest of the book, n means the count of the sample. 2 to the k, whatever that k is, the k is going to tell us number of classes. So let's just count first. Now these are numbers, so we can use the count function. Control Shift down arrow. And you could hit Enter if you want to be, because let me just show you. I'm all the way down at the bottom, but just show you. Notice this is a simple function. We don't have to put that closed parentheses, right? So if we were down at the bottom, instead of taking the time to scroll up, we can just hit Enter, right? Now Enter brings us down one. When you hit Enter, the formula goes down. We've seen how to do Control Enter, which is useful. Another method, in this case I like to use it, is Shift Enter, because it goes up. Shift Enter puts the formula in the cell and goes up one. So let me do that again. Equals count. I'm going to click at the top, Control Shift down arrow, and then Shift Enter. All right, however you do it, we got our count. Now, number of classes. You just got to start. I'm going to say 2 to the 4th. And then I'm going to build my formula, equals 2. And Shift 6 is caret, which means exponent 4. All right. Now, our rule is 2 raised to the k has to be greater than n, right? So is 16 greater than n? No. So now I'm going to increase this. 5, Control Enter. 6, Control Enter. 7, Control Enter. 8, Control Enter. OK, so finally now I get a number that is greater. So 2 to the 7th is greater than 200. So I'm going to start there. Next step, determine the width of the class. And now this kind of is going to be common sense. But first we need to figure out what the max is, right? Remember, one of the main guides is whatever categories we create, we have to have enough to accommodate all the numbers. Control Shift down arrow, Shift Enter. I'm going to do, oops. Yeah, I did the max and then the min. Min. Control, by the way, equals min. I see that it's on the list. I can either type open parentheses, double click this, or hit Tab. Click on the top cell, Control Shift down arrow, Shift Enter. So 65 to 18. Well, let's look at the range. This is a measure, tells us the spread in the data. Well, the range is going to be big minus, or max minus min. Now, 47. So whatever we do, our low end of the first class and our upper end of the last class better span 47 years, right? So our approximate width, we just use common sense. If this is how many classes, that's the range, equals this divided by this. 5.87. So width of the class. Well, we could say, I'm going to move it down to 5. I'm not going to use 5.875. I'm not going to even really use 6, because then our classes would say like 6 to 12. 12 to whatever that is, 18, if I can do math in my head. So I'm going to start with 5. And kind of the way I'm thinking is it either has to be 5 or 10. All right, range. Now, range for classes. Class width times k. So let's go ahead and calculate that. Class width, width of the class, times our k. Oh, yeah, right. Oops. So we can see right here, if we were to use 8, that was the first number that got our 2 to the 7th above 200, right? If we used 8 and this width, it wouldn't work. So now if I change this to 10, we definitely have enough. But, you know, I want to see the spread in this data spread out more. So I'm going to keep it 5. What does that mean? Well, this isn't big enough, right? So I'm going to change this to 9. 10. All right, so finally we get a 10 gives us 50 here, right? So I took my 5 times my 10, and 50 just is above 47. Notice that once I change this input here, it changes the approximate width, right? So we still have 5 there. So that's looking good. Now, this number must be bigger than this number. Now, I can eye this, but I'd like a formula to tell me whether this is true or not. And I want to start up here. I'm going to move this down back to 8. I want to do a true or false formula. Remember in our chapter 00, we talked about different types of formulas. There's calculating formulas, text formulas, which we used for our labels. This is a true-false formula or a logic formula. I want to ask the question, is that greater than this? This logical formula or true-false formula has only two possibilities, either true or false. False. So that way, I have a visual cue here. All right, so now I can come up here and try 9, 10. And finally, when I see a true, I can see. Now, you know, that's kind of unnecessary because we can see the difference between this and this. But I don't know. I've had times when I'm doing Excel and the true-false logical formula catches an error I make. All right, so all of this it looks like we have a recipe, but we're certainly deviating from the recipe a lot. Our third step is to determine the class limits. Well, first, let's calculate the low limit. Well, 18. It's got to be less than 18, less than or equal to 18, right? And it's 5, so the only logical thing to keep the classes neat is to go down to 15. Notice over in this example here, we started from 0 to 19. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. The lower, I'm going to say equals that. Notice all of these labels are going to be linked up here. So if we were to change any of this, this would change also. Tab. Now for the upper, we need to say equals that plus the increment. And I'm going to have to lock this, F4. But wait a second. These are integers. So we're going to choose to go 15 up to 19. So really, what's 15 plus 5? It's 20, so I have to subtract 1. Now, why that? There really is 5 to our increment because both the 15 and the 19 are included. Count on your fingers. 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 is 5. All right, so now we say equals this. And that will give us 19, but we need to add 1 up. Remember, we're dealing with integers here. So nothing can fit between 19 and 20, so this is OK. All right, this formula will work down here. We highlight these, drag down. All right, and we have our categories. Now, very quickly, we just did this just a moment ago. We're going to calculate our label, age class. We're going to calculate using COUNTIFs. Remember, we have 2 criteria, upper and lower, and we're looking through that age. COUNTIFs, criteria range 1. Control-Shift down arrow F4. Whoops, I better scroll over so we can see. Criteria range 1, comma, criteria. Greater than or equal to. Comma, and I Control V, because I just copied that, paste. There's criteria range 2. And then less than or equal to. These are the integers, so we have the equal sign on both sides. Control Enter. Double click and let's see. I don't want to double click because I don't want to replace that. I'm going to copy it down. There's my total. Now we can create our histogram. Alt F1 for column. I'm going to click right here, delete. I'm going to click up here in the formula bar. Whoops. Number of transactions by age class, age group. I'm going to go up here and change it to 12. Click on the lines, delete. Click on the columns, Control 1. Gap width, none. I'm going to not change the fill. I'm going to go to border color, solid line, and this. The reason why is it's hard to see the difference between the columns when you keep them the same color. But if you add a border color, all right, now I'm going to delete. Go up to Layout, Outside, so we added those. I'm going to go up to Layout, Horizontal Title below, Age by years. All right, so now we can clearly see, as compared to our other chart, we can see with our frequency distribution, we can see the spread in the data. We can actually look at the tabular form or the graphical form. Much more detail here. So we get a more nuanced picture. 20 to 24 is the most. 25 to 29, and then there's a tail off. But look at this. There's a bunch of people over in the, looks like the 50 to 64 group that throw boomerangs here. So again, we're doing frequency distributions and then graphical representation of that frequency distribution. Since it's quantitative data and there's no gaps between our classes or categories, we show our column chart with no gaps. All right, so that's about how to go through and determine how many classes class width, etc. You can see it's a lot of back and forth trial and error. Now, I want to show you how to do all this with pivot tables. I'm going to click on the sheet FD, Frequency Distribution and Charts Pivot Table. Now we have our data here. Let's create the categorical one first. That's this one. With pivot tables, as we saw, you click in one cell in the data set, Insert, Pivot Table, Pivot Table. Now I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut from now on, Alt NVT. One cell selected, Alt NVT. I'm going to say in this sheet right here. And I'm going to click in the very top cell, E1, and click OK. I'm going to drag region. Let me see if I can. I'm going to drag region down to row, region down to values. Oh, is that so easy? Remember, pivot tables annoy us with the part of the formatting. So I'm going to go up to Design, Report Layout, and Show in Tabular. Wow, that's amazing. I'm going to click right here and type frequency. And I'm going to create a column chart. I'm going to open up my ribbons, either right-click, unminimize, or Control F1 is a toggle. I'm going to go to here and click Pivot Chart. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's not do that. Let's click in one cell and Alt F1. Oh, that is so cool. Now, for pivot, these things show up here, which are fine if you want to filter, but we don't. So right-click, and then hide all field buttons. Click here, delete. Click on the lines, delete. Click here, delete. Type your title. You can color them different or not. I'm going to go up to Layout, Data Labels, Outside In. And there we have our pivot table and pivot chart. Categorical. Now let's go and do our age and our revenue or sales. Now notice integer, decimal. I should make a little bit integer and decimal. The pivot table will pick that up. Let's click in one cell, doesn't matter which one, Alt NVT. I'm going to place it in this sheet. Now, this is dangerous to put pivot tables on top of pivot tables in a sheet, because if you pivot this, it can destroy the other pivot table. So just to keep everything on one sheet, for this video, I'm doing them all on one sheet. I would probably put them on separate sheets. If you're never going to pivot them, then it works OK. I'm going to click OK. We're going to have to drag age down to row labels. Now we want to come over and right-click and group. Now we've already done our determination here. So start at, I'm going to say 15. 65. That's fine here. And then by, and I'm going to put 5. So now we get all the way to, but notice what the pivot table does. It includes a different last group. So 55 up to 59, that's exactly 5. But this one's from 0 to 65. That's 6. So the pivot table does something a little bit different. But that's OK. Remember, it's all we're grouping it to see patterns. All right, let's go ahead and drag age down to values. We can see we get a slightly different count. I think we had 17 and then 4 in our last group, which was 65 up to 69. All right, so now we can change the design, tabular, and I can create a chart. I'm going to close this. If we need to open it back later, we right-click Show Field List. All right, so I'm going to Alt F1. There's my column. Right-click, hide, delete. I'm going to click up here and type Number of transactions by age group. Enter. Delete these lines. Click on the columns, Control 1. No gap width. I'll change the vary colors by point. Go up to Layout, Data Labels outside in. Axis, let's do horizontal. Age in years. I can probably delete this too. All right, so that's from a pivot table. So we have 1, 2. And finally, we want to see how to do our last one. Click here, Alt NVT. Existing location. I'm going to click right here. This is dangerous. If we were to ever ungroup this, it would just go whoosh and destroy our pivot table. I'm going to drag revenue. We've already done our analysis to figure out what the start number, the increment, etc. So I'm going to right-click Group. I'm going to start at 20. Tab 300. Tab, and here we're going to do 50. Now, these are decimals. We've entered this in, and watch how the labels come out different. 20-70. Okay, so we did something quite, I didn't do something right here. I don't want that less than 20 and these odd groupings here. So I'm going to right-click, go back to Group. Now what did I do here? Oh, start at 0. So luckily I made that mistake. We can clearly come here and edit it once we've grouped it. Click OK. Also, so now we get the categories we want. Also, you can right-click Ungroup. And by the way, in 2007 and 10, if you group these, any other pivot tables based on this data set right here will also be grouped. Zoom in here. I don't really like those labels, so I've got to show you a great trick here. We could go in and edit each one of these and type, but I don't want to do that. There's a Find and Replace feature. So if I go up to Find, Replace, the keyboard shortcut is Control H. I can say find a dash and replace with space, up, space, to, space. Notice I've highlighted these, so it's only going to search that range. And then click Replace All. Made 6 replacements. Click OK. That's Find and Replace. Remember, it's up in the Home ribbon, Edit, Find. I'm going to go up to Design and change that to tabular. By the way, I have no idea. I don't know how to change the default to a particular style like that. I wish we could do that. All right. I'm going to close this and make a pivot table, pivot chart in high speed. You ready? Alt F1. Oh, delete. What did I do wrong there? I forgot to add an extra field to do the calculation upon. So I'm going to right-click, Show Field List. Drag revenue down to here. Alt F1. Delete. Delete. Click up here. Number of transaction by revenue or sales, whichever one you like. If only I could spell. Right-click, hide all field buttons. Click on the columns, Control 1. Gap width. I'm going to keep it the same color, so I'm going to add a border color. Go up to Layout. Outside End Data Labels. Click here, Delete. Axis, horizontal, sales. All right, so wow, that's a lot. Same exact three pivot tables and, frequency tables, distributions, and same three charts done with a pivot table. So we did categorical, we did integer quantitative, decimal quantitative, including a replace and find, and then we made our charts. A couple more points in this video here. I want to go over to F or PT. When do you decide when to use a pivot table and when to use a formulas? Formulas, for what we're doing here, formulas take more energy. And there's an exact option inside a pivot table. This is a pivot table to do the same thing. So if that's the case, then pivot tables are much faster. So that's the big advantage there. But formulas update instantly if you change the data. So if your data is changing, you might want to consider using a formulas instead of a pivot table. And I'm going to show you an example of that. The other situation is sometimes pivot tables are limited. They only have so many calculations, whereas formulas are not as limited. All right, let me show you an example here. I want to convert this table, and in Chapter 00 we saw an example. I want to convert it to an official Excel table. So I'm going to go up to Insert Table or Control T. And then I'm going to click OK. So now this is a table. Let's add a new record down here. Now, the advantage of this table feature is if we add a new record, meaning a new transaction down here, it becomes part of the table. Formulas that look at this will automatically update. Now, the pivot table recognizes the table too, but it won't automatically update. So let's add a record and see how this works. I'm going to say 7/2. Sold a quad. Now, before I hit Tab and enter this, notice the count is 3 for quad and the count is 3. But when I hit Tab, 4, this one does not update. $400. So the formula updates, the pivot table doesn't. Now, it's easy to update a pivot table. All you have to do is notice it's a 3. Right-click anywhere in the pivot table and refresh. And sure enough, it updates. But if data is continually changing, that gets annoying. And so then people oftentimes switch over to formulas. So formulas automatically update when any source data changes. Pivot tables do not. Pivot tables are faster and easier than formulas. All right, let's go over a couple more topics for frequency distribution. Sometimes you have a situation like this. Here's our frequency distribution. We have categories, reasons for dissatisfaction. So we have these categories. These are from surveys or phone interviews, right? So we have some percentages. And down here, we have a count of 2 and 1. And here are the percentages. Once these get below 5%, sometimes people like to group. So instead of rough wood and no instruction, we want to group these together and call them other. So here's how you would do that. Here, this formula is simply a count ifs. I'm going to copy it down all the way down to there. Now, notice I replaced the formatting when I copied it down. So I'm going to point to the Smart tag and say fill without formatting. Well, look at this formula. That's silly. It's looking at other. There is no other here. So we have to know our categories. And up here I have rough wood and no instructions. I'm going to, instead of clicking there, click on rough wood. That's kind of hard to see there. I should not have made it green. And I'm going to add. Now, right now, it's going to look through there and get rough wood, which would be a count of 2. So COUNTIF will give us a count of 2. Plus, and I'm going to paste this again without the equal sign. And I'm going to replace, I double-click that G11, and now I'm going to click there. Now, it's going to count. It's as if we took the formula from that cell and the formula from that cell and put them together in one cell. So that's one way to do it. Here's another way with a pivot table. You can click in the data set, Alt-NVT, and I'm going to place it down here. I'm going to drag dissatisfaction down to the row labels, dissatisfactions down to values. I'm going to close the pivot table. frequency. All right, so these last two right here, we can simply highlight them. This is not the same order, so I want to sort first. So notice it sorted these by alphabet, but I want to sort on the numbers. So I'm going to right-click Sort, bring the biggest to the top. So you can sort a pivot table. Now we have rough wood and no instructions at the bottom. So I'm going to highlight these. Right-click Group. What? Group? We're not grouping numbers. We're grouping categories here, words. So I'm going to group. Ooh, look at that. Now it's called this group. I'm going to click here and type Other. And then we need to collapse all of these. Right, and so there we have our Other. I'm going to right-click Sort, and the biggest on top. So that's another way with pivot tables to do it. All right, and finally, one last topic. If you're in the class, we don't need to do this, but this is here just so that if you ever encounter it, you know, because there's something called the frequency function. Now, the frequency function is the easiest way to do a formula and count. But the categories are always the same. And you can't change them. But with the count ifs, you can change them. So here's how the frequency functions. I'm just going to highlight this, type frequency, tell it the upper limits in the data, and then use a special keystroke called for array functions. And it will automatically create without adding all the fancy comparative operators and joining and all that. But again, these categories will automatically be created. You only give it the upper bins. The first category will automatically be created. The revenue count in this category will be less than or equal to 50. The subsequent categories are similar to what we had before, except for the upper end is included and the lower is not. And finally, they have one extra category. Whatever you give as the upper limit of the last class, it'll create automatically one extra class that says greater than that. Now, the one great thing about this is that this setup of categories will always capture any value, because the first one is less than or equal to the first upper limit. All of these ones are between with the upper limit included, and the last one is everything above. So no matter what numbers are over here, you put these upper limits in, it will capture them. All right, you ready? Here's some steps here. Highlight all of the cells you want in advance. Now look at this. That's how many upper limits we gave it. But because it automatically creates this extra one, you have to highlight one cell more. In the active cell, you type equals frequency. It wants the data and the bins. That's it. Data, Control Shift down arrow. Now I'm going to scroll up. This is a unique type of function. It's called an array function. You do not need to lock those cell references there, comma, and then the bins. You want the upper bins. Close parentheses. Now, you have to use a special keyboard shortcut to tell Excel that you're entering an array function. And you have to use Control Shift Enter. So you hold Control and Shift both down at the same time, and then tap Enter. Notice up here in the formula bar, you can see these curly brackets. They're automatically added in when you do an array function like this. And it is all considered one thing. It actually is called array because it enters an array of values in to multiple cells at one time. All right, that's the longest video I ever did here at YouTube, all about frequency distributions. We'll see you next video for more about Chapter 2.